Hello fellow Earthlings, it's Libs, and today I'm going to be doing my July reading wrap-up. So you know how recently I've been so proud of myself because I've been reading 10 books a month and I thought that was amazing for me. Well, this month I read 20 books. I don't know how that happened. Okay, well I do know how that happened. I took part in the Summer Splash readathon and I read too many books. So I'm filming this video a little early, so technically at this point I've read 19 books, but I'm almost finished with Luster by Raven Slimani, so I'll probably finish that tomorrow, so yay, then it will definitely be 20 books. So I took part in the Summer Splash readathon this month, which was fantastic. I had a really great time doing that. You can see my vlog up here. I was going to do a part 2, but there were only 3 more books left for me to read, so the footage was a bit boring and quite quick, so I'm not gonna bother, but I did read all the books that I wanted to, and I'll mention if the books that I read for that challenge here. So I'll start with my reading stats. I read at this stage, well, by tomorrow it'll be 20 books. So far I've read 4,402 pages. My books have all been medium or fast paced, which is exciting. I don't normally read many fast paced books. The majority were under 300 pages. It was a relatively even split between fiction and non-fiction, but a few more fiction. And the genres I read the most of were literary, historical, fantasy, and contemporary. And my average star rating was 4.6 stars. So you can see I had a very positive reading month. So I think I'll start by talking about the books I decided not to give a star rating to. These are all very short non-fiction books where rating them just feels a bit odd. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Notes on Camp by Susan Sontag. I read this because I was planning on doing a video where I read like Harry Styles. I kind of despised one of the books. One, I had nothing to talk about, and then this one was really tiny, so the footage is terrible. It's not a good vlog. There's only like 5 minutes worth of footage, so I've given up on that. And this is good. I mean, it's just what it says it is. It's Susan Sontag's essay Notes on Camp, which was the inspiration for one of the recent Met Galas. This is good. If you're studying fashion or anything like that, you should read this. It's great. And the other book I didn't rate is Fortunes for Australia's Choices, which is part of the Monash short non-fiction collection of Australian ideas, I guess. This was good. I did like it. It kind of just goes into the choices that Australia's been making. A lot of it was sort of in the height of the pandemic. I think this is useful if you are studying, I guess, history or sociology or economy, things like that. But I think if you live in Australia and have watched the news or watched reliable news for the past few years, then you probably know the majority of things in this book, which is why I didn't want to give it a rating. But it's useful to have an account like this if it's something you want to research. It's good. Now I will move on to the 3 stars. I have 3 books that I gave 3 stars to this month. The first is the first book I read for the Summer Splash readathon, and that is Devotion by Hannah Kent. This is historical fiction about this teenage girl coming to Australia from Germany to escape religious persecution in the 1800s, and it's about that, and it's also her dynamic with her family and her relationship with her best friend, who might be more than her best friend. There are a lot of really cool elements to this book, but there's this twist halfway through, and like no one on the face of the planet seems to like this twist, and it does kind of, I don't want to say it ruins the book, but it takes away all of the interesting elements that were set up, and the I guess magical realism side is kind of taken away. So all the more exciting, interesting things aren't in the center of the story anymore, and the character you follow just isn't that interesting compared to some of the other characters. I think the story would be way more interesting to be seen from their point of view. So it was fine, but I had really high expectations for this one and I was a bit disappointed. And then this is the other book I read this month, the Harry Styles video, that I gave up on, and that is The White Album by Joan Didion. It is not even that I dislike this in any way, I wasn't feeling it. It just wasn't the vibe that I think I was after. It was just a little all over the place for me when I was reading it, so I could appreciate the writing, but it just wasn't giving me anything. But I feel like I was just reading it at the wrong time, so I might go back to this book later and give it another shot. And then the third book I gave 3 stars to is Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo, and I am shocked that I did not love this book. I've been so sure for ages that this was going to be a new favourite, and it was fine. It's about this man who's in his 70s who came from Antigua. He's living in the UK with his wife, and he is considering leaving his wife to be with the man he's been in love with since he was a teenager. And so I thought I was going to love it, but pretty much every character in this book is just so frustrating, and it just really annoyed me that this old guy has all these prejudices that he never really overcomes. The wife is infuriating, and the book is quite sympathetic to how difficult it must be to be married to a man who doesn't love her, but still she's infuriating, he's infuriating, the children are infuriating. The only character I liked was Morris, who is the lover, and I didn't like it. I felt like the ending wasn't what I wanted it to be. It was all too happy for these people who really annoyed me. So the writing is fantastic. Bernardine Evaristo did a brilliant job at writing these characters, but I kind of hate all of them. So I did not have a fun time with this book. The audiobook's fantastic. Now we'll move on to the 3.5 stars, and I have 2 books in this category. The first is a poetry collection I read for the Summer Splash Readathon, and that is The Princess Saves Herself in This One by Amanda Lovelace. This is that very kind of modern poetry that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of. It's all mostly very short poems that just don't quite do it for me, but when she writes longer ones, I really enjoyed those. So it kind of explores the trauma in families and the pain of losing family members in quick succession. I would read more Amanda Lovelace, but I don't know. I want to find some poetry that I actually really enjoy, because the modern poems I've been reading just aren't doing it for me. And then the final 3.5-star book is Lemon by Kwon Yeon Sun, translated by Hannah Hong. This is kind of like a murder mystery. I also read this for the Summer Splash, where a girl in her senior year is murdered, and there are 2 main suspects, but neither are charged, and it kind of mostly follows the younger sister of this girl as she grows up and wants to find out what happened. I love the concept. I like that it kind of changed points of view a bit, but it still followed the sister. I think this could have been more fleshed out. This is a really short book. It's only 192 pages. I think if it had been fleshed out a bit more, even just an extra 50 pages, I think would have made a big difference to the pacing. But I do enjoy that this book didn't spoon feed information. There's certain things that it never tells you that characters have done, but it's just implied, and I love that. And I have 5 4-star reads to talk to you about. The first is one I just read, and that is Galatea by Madeline Miller. This is the short story she released a month or two ago that she wrote quite a while ago. And yeah, it just explores the myth of, I think it's technically the myth of Pygmalion, but it takes Galatea's point of view and explores how awful her situation actually would be to be made of stone, come to life, and then suddenly you have a husband who is a bit of an incel. So I enjoyed it. Again, I want it more fleshed out. I love Madeline Miller and her writing style and everything she does, but I wanted more. I also think this was overpriced for what it is. It's one short story, and I paid 15 Australian dollars for it, so it's just a lot of money for a very small amount. Then I read Dear Girls, Intimate Tales, Untold Secrets and Advice for Living Your Best Life by Ali Wong. I read this for Summer Splash as well. I liked this. I listened to the audiobook, so it was fun hearing Ali Wong read it. This is a little bit all over the place. It's kind of her memoir written for her daughters. So there were bits I really enjoyed. You have to like Ali Wong's humour to enjoy this, because it is quite crude, and if you're not into her style of humour, I definitely wouldn't recommend reading this book. But I thought it was pretty good. I did enjoy the majority of it. Then I read Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Battle of the Labyrinth, which love, obviously. I still think my favourite book in this series is The Titan's Curse, but I did have a good time with this, and it did make me read the next book in the series as well. Then I read The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, also for Summer Splash. This follows this old English butler as he reminisces on his life and goes on a short holiday. I don't know how to explain this book. It kind of is looking at his regrets without him ever really saying these are his regrets. It's beautifully written. I did really enjoy it. I just don't know how to describe this one. It's a book you definitely have to read, I think. And the last 4-star book I read was No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference by Greta Thunberg. This is a collection of all of her speeches. So I think it did a really good job at making sure you remember the most important points, but you are reading a lot of speeches that are going over the same kind of thing. So it was good for making you remember, but it also doesn't make it the most interesting read because you are just going through the same information. Then I have 4 4.5-star reads. The first is No Hard Feelings by Genevieve Novak. This is an Australian book, which I love. It's about this woman living in Melbourne. She's 27 and she's trapped in this terrible kind of cycle with her ex. She's working a job she hates. Her friends are kind of sick of her talking about how much she hates her job and how bad her romantic life is. And it's just kind of her learning to come to terms with everything and actually start making positive changes in her life. So I really enjoyed this book. I think particularly just because I don't read a lot of Australian books, so it's fun to actually read something where I get the references to places. Whenever she references the fact that all of these marketing people are all walking around wearing Gormans, I relate to that. I understand that immensely. So you know what, I had a fun time with this. If you're not Australian, you probably won't enjoy this book quite as much as I did, but I really appreciated it. Then we have another book from Summer Splash, and this is Electra by Jennifer Saint. I read Ariadne earlier this year for reading BookTuber's favourite books, and I really didn't like it. So I didn't think I was going to buy this book. I wanted to read it, but I thought I'll borrow it from the library or something. But then I picked this one up and actually really enjoyed it. I think it does a much better job at exploring each individual character that you're following in the book and giving them something to actually do. I think in Ariadne, you're only following Ariadne and her sister, and it just, no one's doing anything. And I didn't like it. Whereas in this one, you're following Electra, her mother, and then also Cassandra. And I just think it did a much better job at exploring the world. You're not being spoon-fed different myths. It treats you like you're smart enough to figure things out, and I just think the writing was better. Everything was better with this one, so I'm glad I read it. Then I of course read Percy Jackson the Olympians, The Last Olympian, which is the final book in that series, and obviously really liked it. I can't tell you too much about it except that it's the final book, fun, adventure. Yeah, I very much appreciated some of the references. That if you've read The Song of Achilles, you'll know what's going on. Or just anything exploring the Trojan War, there's a moment where you can see what's going to happen before it happens, and I loved that. And then the final 4.5-star book I read was Where the Crawdads Sing. I am actually surprised I gave this a 4.5. I think it's more of a 4. Anyway, I liked it. I thought it was pretty good. I think everyone's been selling like the murder mystery aspect, and that's not really all that important in this book. Really, it's more seeing how this girl grows up alone, having to rely on only herself because so few people are willing to help her. And that's far more important than the murder mystery side. But I can see why people like it so much, but it's just not 100% what I want. Then we go on to my 5-star reads, and I actually have 3, which is kind of surprising. The first one I'll mention was a reread, and this was again for Summer Splash, and that's The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I loved this book when I read it, and so I was keen to reread it, and still 5 stars, I still love it. It's super quick, very sad, very dark. I like that I was able to understand a lot more reading it as an adult, and I love this book. I love it so much. It's probably one of my favourite books of all time. Then we've got a sad one, Found Wanting by Natasha Scholl. This is a memoir on grief. When the author was about 22, I think, on Valentine's Day night, her partner dies, and it's her going through what that was like, her coming to terms with her grief, but then also having more tragedy strike, and how she tried to come to terms with how there's no specific way anyone's meant to grieve, but everyone wants there to be a particular way for people to grieve and a time limit on it, but there isn't. And this was heartbreaking, but I loved it. It's incredible. And then I'll end on a slightly lighter note. The final 5-star book I read was Weird Things Customers Say in Bookshops by Jen Campbell. this is really just a collection of weird things customers have said in bookshops. The first 2 chapters are about specific bookstores in the UK, and then the final chapter is things people have said in bookshops all over the world. It included books from my favourite, not books, it included shops that are my favourite bookshops where I live, so that was particularly fun. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I laughed quite a bit. If you've ever worked at retail or at a library or at a bookstore, I'm sure you will relate to the very dumb things that customers say sometimes. Okay, that is it for this video. I'm still reading Luster. At the moment, it looks like it's going to be sort of a 4 to a 5 star read for me, so I'll let you know next month how that one goes, and I will see you next time. Bye.